Yuji Itadori, from the very first moment he activated his cursed energy, had been carrying the 10 Shadows technique. Would he be stronger, or would this make him more vulnerable? What's going to happen to Megumi? And most importantly, how will the Sukuna and Gojo battle even happen? Well, before we start, how did Yuji even get the 10 Shadows technique? So class, as we all know, the 10 Shadows is an inherited technique exclusive to the Zenin clan. So the obvious question is how Yuji, a kid from the Sendai with no sorcerer upbringing and zero Zenin blood, ends up with it at all. Well, this is actually the most important thing to establish before anything else, because if we can't justify it within the rules of the universe, none of what follows matters. But the answer runs through Kinjaku. So let's just assume in this timeline, Yuji's mother, Kaori, is actually a Zenin. Let's just say she belonged to a disowned family from the clan and was specifically targeted by Kinjaku in order to create the perfect vessel for Sukuna with all of the right genetic traits needed to create a strong sorcerer. Let's also assume this child wound up also inheriting the sacred innate technique, the 10 Shadows. Y'all also gotta remember that Yuji's body is genuinely unique. He's built different in its ability to carry things that don't naturally belong to him. He eventually gains blood manipulation by consuming the death painting wombs, and a shrine awakens in him through his connection to Sukuna. His body is practically designed to house foreign techniques. 10 Shadows is a third inherited structure, dormant until his cursed energy first activates. It fits right into that pattern. And one rule holds firm throughout all of this, and it matters a lot for what comes later. The Shikigami that get destroyed, stay destroyed. And Round Deer heals through reverse cursed technique. That's important though, because Mahito's idol transfiguration works by altering the shape of the soul directly, and reversed curse technique cannot reverse a soul already locked into its new configuration. Then Round Deer can stop someone from bleeding out, but it cannot undo what Mahito does when he touches you. So every healing question in this scenario runs through that rule. Now in canon, Yuji is a completely ordinary high schooler right up until he eats Sukuna's fingers. His first encounter with a cursed spirit only goes as well as it does because Megumi is there to help. Now picture that same scene, but when the cursed spirit corners them, two enormous wolves made of shadow explode out of the floor before Megumi can even get close. In this timeline, Megumi is nothing more than a grade 2 sorcerer in his first year, who's excellent at using cursed tools and hand-to-hand combat thanks to his father Toji's genes. He's got no idea that someone who is technically his half-brother is actually out there fighting cursed spirits without even knowing what they're doing. Yuji has no idea what just happened. He doesn't have any words for it, but the cursed spirit is dissolved, and Megumi finds him standing there stunned with these two creatures sitting calmly at his feet, waiting. Megumi's entire purpose in that scene was to be the experienced sorcerer who saves the clueless villain, but that purpose is gone in an instant. What Megumi does instead is report back to Gojo, not just about the finger, but about the fact that this random kid from Sendai appears to be wielding a technique that belongs to his family's bloodline. That's the domino that starts everything falling differently. And here's where things get genuinely complicated for Megumi. He grows up knowing about the Zenin clan and the 10 Shadows. That technique, it was supposed to be the thing that defined him as a sorcerer, the reason the Zenin family even wanted him back in the first place. Now, it belongs to someone else, someone who didn't earn it, didn't inherit it through lineage, and has no idea what it means. Y'all, that quiet resentment is real, and it takes a long time to dissolve, but more on that later. Gojo notices immediately that Yuji's cursed energy signature carries both Sukuna's resonance and something structurally identical to Toji and the Zenin clan's 10 Shadows blueprint, but he keeps that observation to himself. What he does, though, is accelerate Yuji's training in 2 lanes at once. On one side, the standard work, flowing cursed energy properly through the body, reinforcing punches, building the physical foundation that defines Yuji's combat identity. On the other side, Gojo quietly facilitates the Shikigami exorcism rituals one at a time, framing them as specialized training rather than explaining the full picture. However, during all of that training, Gojo also makes it a point to make sure Yuji never realizes he has a trump card with his innate technique, Mahoraga. Fearing Yuji would inevitably lose his life to his uncontrollable Shikigami, Gojo neglected telling him for his own safety, a mistake that would cost him dearly later on. The rituals go faster than they would have for Megumi, not because Yuji is more technically gifted, but because he is physically overwhelming. He tears through the lower tier Shikigami through sheer force. Nue and the Great Serpent take more work because they require precision and patience, which are not Yuji's natural instincts, but he gets there. Now, here's the thing about how 10 Shadows works in Yuji's hands specifically though. The Shikigami reflect their user because they always have. Megumi's versions were tactical, controlled, used to create space and force opponents into bad positions. Yuji's are bigger, angrier, and considerably less elegant. His divine dogs come out closer in size to divine dog totality from the very first summon. His Chimera Shadow Garden, when he eventually unlocks the incomplete version under real pressure, floods the area with liquid shadow, but in a way that's more like a wave than a tool. He has more raw power in the technique and less surgical precision, you see what I mean? The Shikigami are unmistakably his. Round Deer becoming available to Yuji changes the battlefield in a way that nobody in the story was built to account for though. And he unlocked this because of his innate talent to grow so fast, just like what we see in the main series on how he mastered Sukuna's abilities and blood manipulation. But anyway, a healing Shikigami on Yuji Itadori, the person who is already the hardest character in the series to kill, is a serious problem for anyone fighting him. It also means that for the first time, some of the people who died in canon have a genuine chance of making it out alive. But the word "some" is doing a lot of work there, and we'll come back to exactly who makes it and who doesn't. Now, this is the single biggest structural change in the entire scenario, and everything downstream flows from it. In canon, Sukuna's whole endgame was built on one very specific investment: keep Megumi alive long enough to take his body and access 10 Shadows. The binding vow he arranged with Yuji, the secret deal where Yuji gave Sukuna one uncontested minute of control in exchange for being brought back to life, existed for one reason. It was Sukuna's exit, his ticket from Yuji to Megumi. Instead of bouncing from one body to the next, this time Sukuna will make a binding vow just in order to create the perfect opportunity for himself to take over Yuji's body. What this does to Sukuna's psychology is genuinely interesting though. In canon, he was patient, calculating, and always 3 moves ahead. Here, he's a king who cannot leave his prison, and he knows it. His strategy shifts from long-term manipulation to something more desperate, trying to grind Yuji down from the inside, sabotaging Shikigami mid-battle to reduce the external outlets Yuji uses to maintain the internal pressure, and attacking Yuji psychologically through every dark memory and every death Sukuna will eventually commit with Yuji's own hands. It's not elegant, but it's what he has. Beyond these changes though, the earlier arcs of Yuji's first year at Jujutsu High play out largely the same though. In the Cursed Womb mission, the fights at the detention center, and the Kyoto Goodwill event, Yuji is fighting, and the broad shape of those events holds. His Shikigami make him more effective in a few of those battles, and occasionally more chaotic, but none of those arcs hinge on 10 Shadows the way the later story does. And guys, Sukuna basically deals with his biggest threat, the Finger Bearer, pretty much on his own, and heck, let's just say he even wound up gaining Yuji's favor because of it. And so, the 10 Shadows technique is growing alongside him. The exorcism rituals proceeding in the background, but nothing in those early missions is structurally dependent on whether Yuji has a shadow arsenal or not. Where the scenario starts diverging hard, though, is the moment Mahito enters the picture, because Mahito is the first antagonist whose entire threat is built on something Round Deer cannot fix after the fact. That's where the rules of this scenario begin to matter in ways that are irreversible. But before that, I'd also like to make another little change to this timeline. So, let's say in this story, Kenjaku actually managed to steal every single finger Jujutsu High had locked away. And you may be wondering why that little change matters at all, and you and your pretty little head will find out very soon, don't worry. But let's continue. Now, before we get to Shibuya, we need to talk about the arc that sets the emotional stakes for everything that comes after, because this is where Round Deer's limits become personal. Junpei Yoshino's tragedy begins before Mahito ever lays a hand on him. His mother Nagi is killed at home by a cursed spirit attracted to one of Sukuna's fingers that Mahito planted in their house. That happens at nighttime, away from any sorcerer, and Yuji has no way of knowing it's coming. Nagi dies, and because she dies, Junpei falls under Mahito's influence, and the whole horrible act unfolds. Now, here's where things get different though. When Mahito finally reveals himself and moves to transfigure Junpei, remember the rule we established. Round Deer cannot reverse a transfiguration that is already locked in. Healing through reverse cursed technique cannot reshape a soul that idle transfiguration has already restructured. So Junpei's survival doesn't come from Round Deer healing him after the fact. It comes from Yuji using his Shikigami to physically stop the touch from happening in the first place. With Divine Dogs and Toad already deployed in the fight, Yuji has something Mahito never had to deal with in canon. These are threats that can move independently and intercept from angles that he isn't watching. When Mahito reaches for Junpei, one of the Divine Dogs gets between them and successfully pulls Junpei away by the collar. The touch never lands, and Junpei lives, shaken and grief-stricken over his mother, but physically and spiritually intact. Immediately after, Yuji uses Toad to pull Mahito away and slam him into a wall, but in an instant, he sees his Shikigami explode and dissolve right in front of him like it never existed in the first place. That's the sheer terror of idle transfiguration for you. Since the Shikigamis are cursed energy, just a single touch from Mahito is game over for any of them. After surviving the fight, Junpei eventually does come to Jujutsu High, and the friendship with Yuji that canon ripped away before it could breathe, it actually gets to exist. It's one of the quieter and more meaningful things this scenario changes. Mahito still has to survive this arc though, because Kenjaku needs to absorb him at the end of the Shibuya incident to trigger the Culling Game. Yuji can batter and drive him back, but Mahito escapes, as he always does when the pressure gets too high. Yet, the Shibuya incident becomes even more interesting. Gojo being sealed in the prison realm has nothing to do with Ten Shadows or who holds it. Kinjaku's plan depended on exploiting Gojo's emotional reaction to seeing his dead best friend's face. That trap works regardless, and Gojo is sealed. Sukuna's massacre in Shibuya, it still happens, and this part is important to get right. It doesn't happen through some new internal takeover mechanism. It happens exactly the way it does in canon, because the Jogo finger feeding is completely independent of the binding vow. By the time Shibuya begins, Yuji has already consumed several of Sukuna's fingers across earlier arcs. During the chaos, Mimiko and Nanako Hasaba find his unconscious body and feed him one more, hoping to summon Sukuna and ask him to deal with Kinjaku. Before they can, Jogo arrives and force feeds Yuji a huge number of the remaining fingers that he's been hoarding all at once. In consuming that many fingers simultaneously, it overwhelms Yuji's ability to suppress Sukuna, and the King of Curses takes control for roughly 30 minutes. Sukuna massacres Shibuya, kills Mimiko and Nanako when they dare make a request of him, and burns a path through the city. When the window closes, he is forced back inside Yuji. He is back in his cage, furious, and without an exit. He massacres Shibuya from inside Yuji's body, and Yuji has to carry every second of it. Nanami Gento still dies too. He is burned by Jogo's flames, fights through injuries that would have stopped anyone else, and is ultimately killed by Mahito when Yuji sees him turning the corner in a daze. He's helpless to do anything about it. Ground deer cannot be deployed remotely to a dying man whose body has already been transfigured beyond repair. His death shapes Yuji in exactly the same devastating way it did in canon, perhaps more so, because Yuji now carries the knowledge that he had a healing Shikigami and it still wasn't enough. Then comes Nobata. Yuji can easily reach her this time. Critically, what matters here is the same thing that saved Junpei. Yuji arrives before Mahito's touch lands, not after. With his Shikigami deployed ahead of him, Nue intercepts and pulls Nobata back before Mahito can even close the gap. She survives without taking the transfiguration at all. She is shaken and has watched Mahito's technique nearly claim her, but she walks away intact. The main trio makes it out of Shibuya together. Megumi's situation in Shibuya is genuinely different without Ten Shadows. In canon, he created an opening inside Dagon's domain barrier, which inadvertently allowed Toji's reincarnations inside. That entire sequence, the fight with Dagon, the brief and wordless moment when Toji asked his son his name before stabbing him to protect him, none of that happens. Megumi cannot open the barrier. The Toji reunion is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the whole series, and it's one of the things this scenario permanently loses. Maki and the others fight their way out of Dagon's domain through attrition rather than a clean escape, and the difference is that Naobito dies there, but they do get out. Todo loses his arm to Mahito's idol transfiguration, just like in the original timeline. Ground Deer, though, keeps him from dying of blood loss, but it cannot restore what Mahito altered at the soul level, and Boogie Woogie goes silent. He'll find his way back to it through the Vibra Slap adaptation before Shinjuku, but Shibuya costs him the technique he built his entire identity around. Then Inumaki also loses an arm, but Yuji helps him grow it back. At the very end of Shibuya, Kinjaku absorbs Mahito using cursed spirit manipulation and extracts idol transfiguration. He then remotely casts it across Japan, awakening every person he marked across years of preparation. The Culling Game begins. Sumiki Fushiguro is among those who are awakened and forced to participate. All of this happens exactly as it does in canon because it was Kinjaku's 1,000-year plan, and Ten Shadows has nothing to do with it. The Culling Game's true purpose was never a battle royale. This ain't Fortnite. It was a ritual designed to merge all of humanity with Tengen, using the accumulated cursed energy of the colonies as fuel. Kinjaku had been planning this for over 1,000 years. What does change is what Yuji looks like inside the colonies, and how Kinjaku reacts when he sees it. Yuji enters the game with a full Shikigami arsenal and dominates. His fights in the colonies are bigger, messier, and more creative than anything the game's ancient participants expected from a modern first year. Word gets back to Kinjaku fast, and he regrets his decisions. At first, the thought that Sukuna should have been able to take control of Yuji and the Ten Shadows technique with him, but Yuji's will proves to be stronger. Megumi, without Ten Shadows, enters the game to save his sister and has to fight for every inch of it. His arc here is the most earned story in the whole scenario. He has nothing the Zenin clan gave him, and he only has his own strength built over years of training while watching someone else carry the technique he was supposed to inherit. Every fight in the colonies is harder than it should be, and he survives all of them thanks to some help from Angel and Hana Korusu. Now, before we can talk about Gojo, how does Sukuna even fight Gojo in the first place? In canon, Sukuna transferred into Megumi's body through the binding vow he arranged with Yuji at the beginning of the series. Well, that vow doesn't exist in this scenario, so how does he get out into the battlefield? He doesn't leave. That's the answer, and it changes everything. Hajime Kashimo, the ancient sorcerer who made a binding vow with Kenjaku specifically to fight Sukuna, finds Kenjaku in order to confront him. He then gets thrown the last Sukuna finger and gets told to make Yuji swallow it in order to fully transform Yuji into Sukuna. For Kashimo, that plan's good enough. Their clash inside the colonies is the defining battle of the Culling Game arc for Yuji. The fight that pushes him to unlock Chimera's Shadow Garden under genuine life or death pressure. However, Yuji still winds up almost dying from the fight since he couldn't stand a chance against Kashimo's overwhelming speed and power. That's when Kashimo decides to grab an unconscious Yuji by the throat and feeds him the last finger needed to turn him into the resurrected king of all curses. By the end of the Culling Game, Yuji has consumed every remaining Sukuna finger, all of them. Kenjaku has been steering the game towards exactly this moment, because even without the body swap plan working out the way he intended, a vessel at maximum capacity is still an extraordinarily valuable piece on the board. The problem is that at full capacity, the weight of Sukuna's cursed energy inside Yuji reaches something the human soul was not designed to contain indefinitely. Yuji has held Sukuna at bay for years at this point through pure will, conditioning, and the constant eternal pressure the soul perception training gave him. But full absorption is different from partial absorption. With every finger consumed, the pressure inside has been building. So the moment the last one goes down, it becomes a question of not whether Sukuna can overwhelm him, but of how long Yuji can delay it. And the answer turns out to be long enough for the Gojo unsealing, and not a minute longer. Angel and Hanakurusu are still in the colonies. Angel's condition for unsealing Gojo is to kill the disgraced one, meaning Sukuna and Yuji. The negotiation around that is considerably more difficult than it was in canon, because now killing the disgraced one means killing the vessel who is also their ally. The compromise the team eventually reaches is to attempt to exorcise Sukuna from within Yuji using Jacob's ladder as a precision tool, rather than destroying the vessel outright. Angel agrees, reluctantly, because Hana's attachment to Megumi gives the team just enough leverage to get there. Chozo delivers the black gate of the prison realm to the group, Gojo is freed by Angel's Jacob's ladder, and Gojo comes home looking like he was never really gone. Then Fumihiko Takaba distracts Kenjaku long enough for Yuta to land the killing blow. Kenjaku dies, and as he transfers authority over the Culling Game to Sukuna with his last act, the stage is set for Shinjuku. When Kenjaku dies and transfers authority over the Culling Game to Sukuna as his final act, the shift in that transferred power, combined with the full finger count and the accumulated stress of the fight through the colonies, tips the balance. Sukuna forces his way through, the internal war going nuclear in the space of seconds. Yuji fights it harder than anyone in the world could fight anything, and he loses anyway. Sukuna seizes the body. For the first time since the series began, he has fully uncontested control. With 10 shadows, shrine, blood manipulation, and the physical chassis of the toughest vessel he's ever inhabited, he stays exactly where he is, standing in the ruins of what Kenjaku's plan built, and waits for Gojo to come to him. Because Sukuna, even in this scenario, was always going to have this fight. He just had to wait longer for it than he expected. Yuji is still inside, but for now, he's watching from inside, unable to stop it, which is exactly what he always feared most. Gojo versus Sukuna plays out as one of the most extraordinary exchanges of power the Jujutsu world has ever seen, where Yuji had no clue about his inherited technique's most powerful trump card. Sukuna, having fought hundreds of people, including several members of the Zenin clan, already knew exactly what he needed to tip the scales in his favor against a user of the Six Eyes and Limitless techniques. His plan was simple: summon the 8-handed sword divergent Scylla Divine General, Mahoraga. In canon, Sukuna used Megumi's soul as a buffer to bear Mahoraga's adaptation cycles against Unlimited Void. He exposed Megumi's soul to Unlimited Void 5 times before Mahoraga had adapted enough to destroy the domain. It was a brutal and calculated sacrifice of someone else's well-being, and it worked perfectly. But here, Sukuna has no Megumi to use. He bears each adaptation cycle himself. His soul is incomparably more resilient than Megumi's, which means the process takes more cycles and more time. But it also means Sukuna takes genuine personal damage from every exposure. He still gets there because Sukuna's willpower is absolute, but he crosses the finish line of the Gojo fight significantly more spent than he was in canon, as Gojo forces more out of him. The victory is still Sukuna's, but that cost matters enormously for what comes next. By the time the coalition assembles in Shinjuku, Sukuna is entering his most damaged state yet. Gojo's death is still devastating, and Yuta still uses Kenjaku's copied brain-swapping technique to transfer transfer into Gojo's corpse and fight Sukuna one last time, which forces Sukuna to expend even more cursed energy before Rika's 5-minute time limit runs out. Chozo fights in the battle too, and it costs him everything, and just like in the main timeline, he does not survive Shinjuku. The soul perception training Yuji underwent throughout the Culling Game, learning to see and reinforce the boundary between his soul and Sukuna's through sustained Black Flash work with Yuta, allows him to disrupt Sukuna's technique usage from within at critical moments. These windows are brief though. Sukuna adapts to everything, but brief is enough when Todo's Vibra Slap Boogie Woogie is swapping positions at up to 50 times per second, and Angel is positioning Jacob's ladder for the one shot it was always meant for. When Angel fires Jacob's ladder at Sukuna's grip on Yuji's body, it is not an execution of the vessel, it is a surgical separation. The technique cutting the seal Sukuna's soul has clamped onto Yuji from the inside. All of this combined with Yuji actively pulling himself towards the surface while Sukuna is being battered from every single angle outside, the separation happens. Sukuna's soul is expelled. Without a body, without a vessel, and without a finger left unconsumed in the world to anchor himself to, he dissipates. The King of Curses, arguably the most dangerous being in the history of Jujutsu sorcery, fades away. So what's left afterwards? Well, Yuji himself walks away from Shinjuku in bad shape. The Ten Shadows technique stays with him, fully and completely his, for the first time in his life. He is the only sorcerer in the history of the Jujutsu world to carry 10 Shadows, Shrine, and blood manipulation simultaneously. Yuji eventually develops his own domain expansion too, though the exact mechanics are left deliberately ambiguous even in canon. The rest of his story continues in Majuro. But guys, that's what would happen if Yuji Itadori had the 10 Shadows technique from the beginning. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, press all the buttons, and the notification bell. That's my favorite. And if you're curious, here's what would happen if Majuro Yuji was reborn with all of his memories.